Okay, so this week we were discussing delegating roles as far as like elders, deacon, and laity, and equipping the core and launch team. And so um, next week, next Tuesday, I'll be gone, but Nathan Klein from Rero Church is going to be leading the discussion. And he is, I had originally asked him to do week nine's topic, which is prepping the launch team for the first public service. But basically, I'm going to have him combine equipping the core launch team and preparing them. It's kind of the same thing. It's very similar. So he's going to kind of cover both of those. So he's going to talk about how to get the core team ready, which is supposed to be part of this week, and what they did and how to kind of get ready for that first public launch service if you do that approach. Now, if you do a more house church, more organic approach, launch service is really not your thing, so it's fine. These guys did more of a big launch approach, um, and so I thought his perspective would be really good to kind of discuss what it looked like, what are the logistics that they covered on launch day. He's going to walk you through. I kind of joked with him in the email, walk the class through 2 a.m. to 2 p.m. that Sunday. Like 2 a.m. when you're hugging the toilet to 2 p.m. when you're closing up the last little bit, because first day of the church. And I remember when they launched. They launched out at the Sawtooth Center here in downtown Winston. But anyway, so he's coming next Tuesday while I'm out of town, so he'll be the whole time. And it'll be up to you guys to make sure Collaborate's up. And Thursday we'll go over all that and make sure everyone has everything good. So this week is delegating roles as far as elders, deacons, and laity. Okay, and so there's going to be a short little video of me and my pastor Will Plitt talking about this a little bit, and so I'm going to put that up today, and we recorded a couple weeks ago, and so that's going to be up today. I wanted to talk a little bit too about how roles apply to the models and approach. So this was a couple weeks ago when we talked about finding a church model. That was like week 2 or 3, I think, something like that. We talked about selecting a church model and also a church planting approach. And I delineate and say there are two separate things, that a church model is really what a local church looks like. And so right now, the church that you're in now has one of these 3 models, either a centralized, where everything kind of happens on main campus. All right, it has offices, you have a building, a very more centralized structure, hierarchy, boards, committees, that sort of thing. That's kind of a more centralized approach. Decentralized would be your house church, koinos type, as steps we'll call them, where there is no centralized leadership or centralized location. It's more scattered out in homes. There's a hybrid rather than scattered. With the hybrid is, yes, there is a centralized component to where we are meeting weekly, but we're also emphasizing a more decentralized approach in our small groups and missional communities. So those are kind of the 3 models of a church, and these are extremely broad. But the approaches is okay. There's a little bit different. So a lot of times you'll see that the church planting approach is called a church planting model, which is fine. But notice it's church model versus church planting approach or church planting model. There's a difference. So when you're planting a church, there's a different mindset. You're thinking a different way because it hasn't got started yet. After it's been established, you kind of find what that model is, and it usually will fit in one of those 3. And so your 5 approaches, the traditional, which is, hey, let's move in, let's disciple a few believers, start to get them together for Bible study. That Bible study gets to be about 4, 5, 6 families to start meeting on Sunday. Then let's start a Sunday school or a small group ministry. Let's start looking for a building. That's kind of your traditional way, which has been church planting for years. And so it's not traditional as in we start out with an organ and piano and a King James Bible. It's not that kind of traditional. There's a difference between having traditions and being traditional than traditionalism. Traditionalism is when you say, we've always done the King James, we can't do anything different. That's traditionalism, not a tradition. Traditions are fine, we all do them. Even a church plant, you have your traditions. Big launch is the approach where you try to get 150, 200, 300 people for the big core. So there's a lot of advertising. You have a big core team. You're doing a lot of things, sending out mailers and flyers and radio things, all that kind of stuff. A lot of people do that. Try to have 300 people at the first service. High cost, and we talked about those. About the different. We'll go into it in just a second, but we talked about how that just takes a lot of money, a lot of effort. Missional incarnational, which is basically close to a kind of a blend of traditional and organic, where you basically plan a missional community, Bible study, you're engaged in the neighborhood, you get three or four of those, five of those communities established in a certain part of town. And you say, hey, let's start meeting together once a month on Sunday or something like that. And then you kind of work yourself into a weekly gathering and a little more structure. So you start decentralized, but become more centralized. That's why it fits into the hybrid model approach. Um, and so really, organic, your house church, that of course fits the decentralized to the T. Then your satellite, your multi-site, which we talked about, is it really church planting? In a way it is, in a way it isn't, because you're saying it's just an extension of our church. So same DNA, same name, same other thing, but it also is a new gathering, a new side of town. So in a way, it's kind of a plant. So I think it's really both and. I don't think we should really separate those too much. And so I want to talk about leadership for each of these. Because we're talking about this week's topic is delegating roles for elders, deacons, and laity. And so let's talk about leadership inside of each church model. And so when you have a centralized approach, everything is happening there at the church property. That's where the decisions are made. It's where the people gather. And there's a lot more structured governance. Typically, a centralized approach usually has more of a senior pastor model as far as leadership. And so you have a senior pastor who either is under or works alongside of a deacon board. Okay, and this is not standard. There are some plural elder-led centralized models, of course. Presbyterian churches, they are centralized very much. They still do Sunday school. They have everything there. So most of your standard Presbyterian churches, they have that. They just flip the role of pastors and deacons essentially. So you have in a centralized, your leadership is very structured. All right. Here you have an organization chart for your leadership. The people know what who answers to who. Okay. You have a senior pastor usually, and this would be more in a Baptistic type congregational led structure. So you would say that in the hierarchy that the senior pastor is kind of under the congregation. The congregation has the final voice and vote, so to speak. But when it really comes down to it, the congregation is looking to the pastor for leadership. Usually that pastor has to either get approval or work alongside of a deacon board. And so the deacon board functions more of like a board of trustees type deal, to where they help make governing decisions, and then they take those decisions as a board, they take those to the church for the vote. And so centralized models have a very structured, they have their bylaws nail down exactly what is to be voted on, how far the pastor's leadership and decision making extends to. In a centralized church, a pastor can't really just walk up and say, you know what, I want to hire Derek as a youth pastor. I'm going to bring him in tomorrow. Deacon of finances, make sure he's getting paid. You do this, and you can't really do that in a centralized model. There's vote, there's process, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of the centralized approach. Now, if you're elder-led, it's essentially the hierarchy starts with your elders, and underneath them are the deacons who are serving underneath that, and then the congregation, depending on the vote. So that's kind of the three-tiered hierarchy there. Centralized, you have a lot of leaders who are your lay leaders are leading things like the various ministries of the church. They're not really able to make decisions unless they're part of a committee. Okay, so most centralized churches have some type of committee structure, and it's because they don't want one dictator ruling the Lord's Table Committee. They do Welch's juice every single Sunday. Well, I don't like Welch's juice. Okay, well, the committee gets together and says, oh, we're not going to use Welch's, we're going to use Food Line brand. Okay, whatever. So you see that most centralized models have some type of committee or teams of various numbers. So I know the centralized church that I was at for several years as youth pastor, we had, I think, 18 or 19 different committees, which was, I think, a little bit much. There was one other church that I knew of in Winston-Salem that outdid us. They had 21 committees, and they only had like 30 people. And so you do the math. A lot of people were serving a lot of different areas.
And that's just a lot of wear out.
It is, because a lot of those decisions made by committees could have been made by a higher level leadership team, elders, or something like that. But with a congregational led, the congregation likes to have input and voice, which is good. It's always good to have your congregation, whether you're an elder led or a congregational led. Your people want to actually lead, and so what you have in a centralized approach, your laity are really leading the smaller ministry. So maybe even like your youth ministry, if you can't pay a youth pastor, it'd be a laity who are in charge of kind of overseeing that. The nursery, the children's, the van committee, all those different things, building and grounds. You have lay people leading those. So the pastor is not going to be in charge of the building and grounds in most centralized cases. Or finances. That's a very good thing for him not to be in charge of. So centralized, the laity does get a lot of leadership roles if they get to lead one of those committees. Okay, that's kind of where leadership is brought in for the laity. Now, in a decentralized, though, there's little to no structure or governance. And so when we talk about elders, deacons, and laity when it comes to a decentralized approach, well, most of them, a lot of times, don't have an identified pastor. So if we were a house church and this was Malin's home, Matt, you just be you're kind of the official host. But if Charlie is leading our Bible study every week, kind of leading that part of it and kind of does more of the talking and leading, we'll kind of unofficially look at him to be our leader, but we won't call him our pastor. In most cases. Now, there are some house churches that do say, yes, we do have a pastor and we do have a deacon. Our deacon handles, we do put our money together each week, and so we have a deacon who kind of covers the bank account. And a lot of house churches do that, especially house churches that are parts of networks. They will have pastors, and actually they'll have an elder team. The Simple Church Alliance in Louisville, Kentucky, a friend of mine leads that. They have 12 different house churches in the city, and he is the pastor, and he has 3 or 4 other elders who they kind of oversee 3 or 4 house churches. And so they're a part of one, but they're just keeping up with the leaders of the other. So in a decentralized, they may or may not have elders, they may or may not have deacons, but every person has a role, okay? Which is one of the healthy things of a decentralized or house church approach or model, is that the laity truly is doing something, okay? So you're in a home. Who's kind of in charge of making sure the meals are ready? Okay, well, these 2 are. Well, who's going to kind of plan our calendar for the year? Well, these 2 are. Who is going to kind of search out things in the neighborhood for us to be part of as far as ministry and serving? Well, these 2. So in those type of roles, and a lot of times, each week the Bible study is led by a different person. So you get to kind of own leadership in that sense as laity when you're a decentralized model. And so this is really attractive if you've been in a church for 20 years and you've never got to lead or serve or really do anything because you've never been asked to. You get to a house church, you're put into immediate leadership almost, and a lot of roles are given. So our church is a hybrid, gathered and scattered, and so here the leadership structure gets a little bit interesting because as it is a hybrid, it's also a hybrid of the centralized and even decentralized. And so when you have a hybrid approach, so I think of my church, 121, is really a hybrid, gathered and scattered. So we now have 4 elders. Well, we're getting ready to vote in 2 new elders this coming Sunday. So we're going to have 4 elders. We do have a team of deacons, and we are elder-led, so the elders make the decisions except for voting on new elders. That's one of the things that the congregation does vote on, is we do vote, and we'll vote next week. We do vote on new elders, but the elders select them and say, here are the 2 guys we want to present as elders, and the church gets a week to raise any kind of issue, like, oh no, I think I saw Daniel at a strip club, I don't think he should be an elder. Okay, well, you have a week to bring up that kind of stuff. So you do have an elder, usually in the elder team, or even in a hybrid, you could have more of a senior pastor with a deacon board. You could have that. But since the hybrid gather-scattered is a fairly new model, most are doing plural elder-led, if you kind of survey. So most new churches that kind of adopt this approach or this model, they typically have a plurality of elders. And so I'll even...
How do you select your deacons?
The elders choose them.
Do they recommend?
I haven't been there since they've done that. I'll have to check our bylaws. I think that elders are the only ones that we vote on. I think it's now what many in the kind of hybrid approach do is because we do want the congregation involved. The congregation is really given a voice, though they may not be given a vote. Okay, and so how we kind of do is there are certain things like budget, and if we're going to like change meeting location, like right now we meet at Piedmont. Well, if something happens and we can't meet here at Piedmont anymore, the church will not vote if we find a new place. The elders will say, okay, we're going to look for a new place for us to meet. Oh, we found this middle school over here. We're going to start meeting in their auditorium. Here's how much it's going to cost. It won't be good. The church just lets the elders make that kind of decision. We don't vote on that. But the elders do a good job of keeping all of the congregation in the loop on things. And so often, right after a Sunday morning worship, they'll say, hey, partners, as we call our members partners. They'll say, hey, partners, stick around. We have a couple of announcements that are key to the life of the church. Like we were getting ready to merge with the church a few months back. It didn't happen, but so a lot of our Sunday morning worship right after was updating us on what was happening with the potential merger. And so what you have with this kind of hybrid gathered scattered is usually the laity, their involvement comes in both the centralized ministries of the church. So we do have like a deacon who's over our children's ministry. We have a deacon who is over the connections ministry. So like the greeting when you come in, a little like table set up to kind of, hey, here's some info about the church. You can kind of talk to someone about the different ministries. So we do have people who are serving inside the church, so to speak, in the centralized way. But the laity is also serving in a decentralized way. In that, like me, I'm just a partner. I'm a church planting resident. That's really not an official title. I'm not an elder. I'm not a deacon. I'm just a member of 121, a partner of 121. But I lead a gospel community, and I get to pastor, in essence, my gospel community. Mm. So that's an idea of the laity getting a little more ownership. So it's almost like a Sunday school teacher. So a Sunday school teacher in a centralized approach is on the campus and really is in charge of teaching the curriculum and organizing that class. Well, in this hybrid gathered scattered, when the groups scatter, they scatter with a layperson usually. Sometimes it's an elder or deacon who are kind of doing both. A lot of times it's a layperson, and so what that does, it actually fosters a leadership development for the laity, because I'm learning how to not just lead a Bible study, but how to invest and disciple younger believers. I'm learning how to organize our weekly gatherings. We get together on a weekly basis as a group. I am learning how to handle counseling and issues. One of the guys a couple weeks ago wanted to meet with me, and he wanted to confess some sin that was going on and wanted some help with it. So I'm kind of learning the counseling, discipleship type aspect, stuff that really doesn't always happen like in a Sunday school, even a small group study. Because in essence, in this hybrid model, the elders see these group leaders really as the under shepherds pastoring that small group. And so I'm really in charge of setting everything. There's very little that I have to get approved of by the pastors, by the elders. They keep up with us. The pastors are investing in me as I'm investing in the group. And so I like the hybrid gathered scattered model simply because it gives leadership, it extends leadership beyond the centralized to the laity. So it's not just you're in charge of running a nursery or you're in charge of building grounds, but you actually are getting to learn how to shepherd. And that's actually where they find their next church planters, are from those who are leading those gospel communities and groups or missional communities. So the two guys we are now voting in at our church to be elders are two of our strongest gospel community leaders. One guy's been leading his group for like 7 years. The other's been leading his for 3 or 4. And they are the two groups that have actually multiplied. We came out of one of those groups. Mine did. So I actually learned under Daniel at his group, and he let me be kind of his apprentice. He kind of showed me how to lead a group, and then sent me out with a couple people to start a new group. Okay, so he's actually been involved in church multiplication in a sense, and he's a middle school teacher over in Walkertown. He's not a pastor, he's not an elder, he's not paid or anything. But this kind of approach, he's doing more than just managing the guest table at church, which is the thing to do. So that's why I like this approach, because it gives a really neat balance and it gives more diversity in what people can lead. Now, when it comes to different elders and pastors for a hybrid gathered scattered approach, I wrote a paper on this a couple years ago in my seminary days, like it was still long ago, like 2 years ago. So basically, we have my paper was actually on leadership structures in a church of missional communities, basically, because it is a little bit different. So basically what happens in a church of missional communities, because it starts as a hybrid gathered scattered approach, the approach says, let's have, let's start missional community here, one here, one here, one here, and one here. Okay, so when these get together, let's start gathering corporately as a larger body. So Sunday morning worship service. Well, then what happens as they multiply? Now, Soma Church and the Soma family of churches in Tacoma, Washington, Jeff Vanderstelt, they the ones kind of really pioneered this and teach this well. And so you have these different small groups, and they're scattered. They start to gather. All right, so it's opposite of the traditional approach. Traditional approach says let's start gathering first and then separate people into small groups. A gather scattered or the missional incarnational approach said let's start with small groups and then build out to a larger service. But then once we start having a group that meets over here, then we have it multiply. It becomes its own expression as well. And so what Soma has done is essentially whenever 4 or 5 groups get started in a different area, they actually encourage them to start meeting together as their own church service, basically. Because what it does, it keeps your numbers so you don't have to rent a facility that has 1,000 people. Their church has over 1,000 people in it, but they're spread out through several different what they call expressions. So basically, it's actually a multi-site in essence kind of approach. And so as they get over here, they have another group and kind of does the same thing. So what happens is this is all one church though. Okay, so it's multi-site in that sense, but it's also gather scattered. So typically what they do, they have a team of elders who really they oversee the ministry of the church. And so let's go ahead and even it out. All right, so this is one church with 4 different locations, so to speak. But there's the same elders for each. There's the same structure, same DNA, same everything, even the same deacons. But what they do is for each of these gatherings, they have an elder who kind of oversees these. An elder who oversees these, one who oversees these, and one who oversees these. While some elders aren't in charge of a local expression, they're in charge of the whole thing. Okay? So like Jeff Vanderstelt and Caesar Kalinowski were the 2 kind of main guys. They oversaw the whole big vision picture of the church, but their other elders they equip to kind of shepherd these smaller gatherings. They're their one church. So it's very common in a multi-site. We would call these campus pastors, in essence. Okay, so like Summit. Summit has the same kind of thing, but they're more centralized in that they don't see themselves as a network of missional communities. They see themselves as a traditional approach that once they do, so what Summit will do, Summit will go and they'll start a big service and then break those down into smaller. Then they'll start another campus and then break them into smaller, whereas here, you start with a smaller group. Does that make sense? How that's different? Also with deacons, you still have a team of deacons who are also overseeing the total, like maybe the finances or something like that, but you also have deacons who are also inside of each of these, serving. Then each of these smaller groups are led by a layperson. Okay, the elders are investing in the laity to lead these groups, and you also have lay people who are in charge of doing things like for the larger gathered worship service. Okay, so this can look kind of complicated, but really they just take their small thing and they just replicate it to another place. The biggest difference is they have elders who are kind of overseeing the whole thing. And so when they have an elder meeting, and I think I fleshed this out in my paper a little bit, because I actually called some and talked to some of the leadership to kind of understand a little more how they do. Whenever they have like elder meetings, they get all the elders from each of these locations together to talk about big picture stuff and to see how each of the local areas are doing. So I think it's a pretty healthy approach because it gets a multitude of people who are non-pastoral staff really involved in the total ministry of the church. Any questions or comments so far? This bit was Soma, the Soma family of churches in Tacoma, Washington. And actually, Jeff Vanderstelt, who was their founding and lead pastor, he has now replanted Mark Driscoll's Mars Hill Church in Bellevue. It's now called Doxa. He replanted it. He went and became the lead elder, and is actually redoing the whole DNA of the whole church. So what was once the big mega Mars Hill machine, highly attractional, highly dictatorial, is now actually led by the people again, and it's actually getting to a lot healthy state. Driscoll has moved down to Phoenix, Arizona, and is trying his best to revamp his name. and I don't know how well he's doing.
Is the early church still part of Acts 29?
I'm not sure. So I think Vanderstelt was part of Acts 29. I think he was one of the key people from the beginning, but I'm not really sure. I think Acts 29 has kind of died as far as its coolness, even though it's still going. Yeah, that's kind of killed some of it, though it is still led by Matt Chandler. He's still, I think, the president of Acts 29. So it's still going. But I think it lost some steam. I think it's still going. They're still doing a lot, but it's not quite like, for a while there, it was like, if you're not planting Acts 29, you're not a church planter, which, of course, is wrong. So when you're thinking through, now we're in the kind of the pre-launch phase as we're kind of walking through, and your Google Doc questions for your perspectives this week will kind of reflect this. But you're going to be actually delegating your different roles. You're going to say, okay, here's our lead. So the three of you are going to decide on your team. If we're an elder-led, then all three of you are going to be elders, or two of you are going to be elders and one a deacon. So you're going to decide that this week. You're going to decide who's going to be doing what, and then you're also going to put down basically, here are the roles that we need filled. Here are the ones that are elder positions. Here are the ones that are deacon positions. And here are the ones that are done by the laity. So you kind of work through that. So if you're doing a traditional kind of approach, then you will need to start having some kind of Sunday school teachers type people ready, who can lead your Sunday school, your small group study, that sort of thing. And so you can say, okay, we hope to have 4 or 5 small groups, so we're going to need leaders for that. How are you going to train those? And so that's kind of be your project for this week. We'll be going into that. So, well, that is all I have. I think we are 5 minutes away from class closing time. So, Josh, if you're there, have any questions, feel free to ask before I sign off here.
It's just you.
This one.